Welcome back to the One Winning Pod History Corner. Well, Ravens flock, it was certainly a frustrating week 2 for the Ravens as they squandered a 21-point fourth quarter lead to suffer their first loss of the season. The good news for the Ravens, though, there's still 14 games to go in the regular season. Still plenty of time for the Ravens to mold into the team that they want to be this year. I know that there have been some naysayers on Twitter and in the media doomsdaying and writing the Ravens off already after just one bad game. Some even going as far to say that the Ravens lost a game that good teams don't lose. Respectfully to those opinions, I have to respond. We just really don't have enough data yet to say whether this team is going to be a good team, a bad team, or a great team in 2022. Good and bad teams will lose games of the nature that the Ravens did last Sunday. It happens every year, even to the teams that end up winning the Super Bowl. But in my opinion, what separates the great teams from the merely good and bad ones is how they respond when faced with adversity. So for this week, to give Ravens fans some hope, including myself, I wanted to look back at what I consider to be the top 5 responses to the first loss of the season in franchise history. Yes, we don't know if the Ravens will win in Foxborough this Sunday, but let's at least have some hope and look back at some times the Ravens were able to quickly right the ship after their first loss. Starting this list off, number 5 is going to be the Week 2 matchup of the 2014 season. The Ravens lost their Week 1 matchup against the Cincinnati Bengals thanks to something that had become all too common the previous season, letting a big-time receiver take the top off the secondary, in this case, A.J. Green. The Ravens had a quick turnaround, hosting Pittsburgh on Thursday Night Football and having to contain then-ascending star wide receiver Antonio Brown. The Ravens' defense would hold the Steelers in check this game, forcing 3 turnovers, while the offense would protect the ball and make steady work of the Steelers' defense. All in all, the Ravens cruised to an easy, relatively unmemorable win as far as the rivalry goes, but got themselves back on track very quickly after a close loss in Week 1. And number 4 on this list, we'll look at the 2000 season. After commanding 2-0 start to the season, the Ravens had a letdown game on Sunday Night Football in Miami. Despite a strong performance by the Ravens defense and in a precursor to what would come later on in the season, the Ravens offense could just not get on track in this game. Even though the two teams would end up putting up virtually the same amount of total yards, the Dolphins eked out 19 points to the Ravens' 3. Week 4 saw the Ravens return home with a favorable matchup against an overmatched Bengals team. The defense clamped down even firmer than they did against Miami, keeping the Bengals off of the scoreboard for the entirety of the game. The Ravens' offense ensured that the defense had plenty of slack, even though they wouldn't need it, and ended up outgaining the Bengals in total yardage 391-94. Say what you will about the level of competition that the Ravens faced that day, but it can't be denied that this victory was a complete 180 from the previous week. Number 3 on this list is going to be Week 3 of the 2011 season. Similar to this past week for the Ravens, the 2011 season Ravens suffered a loss where the culprit was the same as what had bounced them from the playoffs the previous season. After blowing out the Steelers in Week 1, the Ravens suffered a surprise defeat to an average Tennessee Titans team in Nashville in a game where the Ravens' offense failed to complete big plays. This shortcoming was a high concern, akin to the pass defense concern for the 2022 Ravens going into that year, and the Ravens' dud of a performance erased some of the good feelings Week 1 had brought the fan base. The Ravens had drafted Maryland speedster Torrey Smith in the second round of that year's draft and traded for Buffalo Bills deep threat Lee Evans, but through 2 weeks of the season, the duo had combined for simply 2 catches for 45 yards. The Ravens appeared to have 2 players who could solve their lack of big playability on offense, but they weren't being utilized to success. That changed when the Ravens traveled to St. Louis. While Evans was inactive for the game, Torrey Smith had his coming-out party, with Joe Flacco lofting his second pass of the game deep up the sideline to Smith for him to take his first NFL catch 74 yards for a touchdown. Before the first quarter was over, Torrey Smith would have his second and third career receptions for 41 and 18-yard touchdowns respectively. Suffice it to say, the Baltimore had found their playmaking receiver and cruised to a 37-7 victory. So number 3 on this list, we saw a rookie break out in a massive way, and the next game on this list, we're going to take a look at NFL history. The Ravens began the 2003 season with a new quarterback, rookie Kyle Boller, as a controversial starter behind center. In these days in the NFL, it was much less common than in today's game for rookie quarterbacks to start out of the gate, even first-round picks. For comparison's sake, Carson Palmer, the number 1 pick in the 2003 draft, would not as much as step on the field for the Cincinnati Bengals until the start of the 2004 season. Yet the Ravens threw Bowler out to the Wolves in Week 1 of 2003 in Pittsburgh against a very strong defense and had him attempt 43 passes. This approach led to the Ravens being down 34-7 before Bowler threw his first career touchdown pass in garbage time. The thought around Baltimore after the game was that the Ravens should have held Bowler out by allowing him to rely on the run game a bit more. Jamal Lewis would only get 15 rushing attempts in the contest. Lewis himself thought he could do more to help the offense with more carries and would make headlines with his guarantee to Browns linebacker Andre Davis that if he received 30 carries against the Browns, he would have a career day. Sure enough, as Ravens fans certainly remember, Week 2 rolls around, and on the second offensive play of the game, Jamal Lewis would break free of the Cleveland defense for an 82-yard touchdown run. Lewis's day wouldn't be over after that play as he dominated Cleveland for 295 yards, which, at the time, was the single-game record for a running back in a game. Ed Reed would seal the big victory with a pick six as time expired, leaving the Ravens with a big division win to erase the bad taste in their mouth from Week 1. And at number 1 on this list, it really shouldn't come as a surprise. Alec already brought this up in the podcast this week. It's just last season, the big Monday Night Football win against Kansas City. As we remember from last year, the Ravens started the season out in Las Vegas, where they surrendered a big fourth-quarter lead, not unlike this past Sunday, albeit one that was not as big. But it was an anxious time among the fan base, if we can remember just to back a year ago. The Ravens had yet to beat Mahomes, and given the Week 1 game against the Raiders was expected to be a gimme win, the fan base was all of a sudden deeply concerned over the probability of an 0-2 start. Luckily, in the end, the Ravens came to play against the Chiefs, going toe-to-toe with them and pulling out a dramatic victory. At the time, it completely changed the outlook and confidence for the season, a feeling that would last until injuries piled up and destroyed the hope from those early games, as we can all remember too well. So there you have it, some hope for this coming Sunday and the rest of the season. Does this mean that I'm guaranteeing that the Ravens will win and get back on track on Sunday? Certainly not. You know, the Patriots, while they're certainly not as strong as they were in years past, they've still got some players there and some coaches that can give the Ravens some difficulty. But if the Ravens don't pull out a win, you know, it's not the end of the season. We've seen other cases in Ravens history where it took more than a single week to get back on track after their first setback. 2009 saw the Ravens endure a 3-game loss streak after starting 3-0. The Ravens rode a 2-game loss streak into the bye week in 2006 after starting 4-0. And even in 2019, the Ravens only started 2-2 before finishing the regular season undefeated. And all three of those seasons I'm using as examples would be years where the Ravens would make the playoffs. So we'll see what happens Sunday, and let's just all get used to the fact that the roller coaster of the NFL season is officially in full swing. Make sure you're strapped in tight, because the only thing we have guaranteed for the rest of the year is that it's going to be wild, as always. Thanks so much for tuning in. Are there any games I left off this list that you feel should be included? Feel free to leave your thoughts here on YouTube or on Twitter, and as always, remember to subscribe to our channel and the podcast for great Ravens content all season long.